Sometimes I have the feeling that I expect would be the same feeling that anyone would have if they were standing on a hill somewhere and they could see a car driving at speed along the next hill and going too fast to go round the corner, and they are going to go straight over the top of that hill and over a cliff into the sea. And you can see it happening. And you actually try shouting, but you know you can't be heard. You just feel like you have to do something. But you're too far away and your voice is too weak to do anything to avert the tragedy you see heading along that road. Well, that's the sort of feeling I have when I see this sort of headline. Britain is about to surrender its sovereignty to the World Health Organization. Right, I'm Granniopteryx. Before I carry on, I want to tell you, because I'm going to be mentioning a certain illness and a certain way of handling it, I'm pretty sure that YouTube would not let me monetize this, so I'm not even going to bother. For that reason, if anyone has ever had the passing thought of donating to this channel, this is the time to put that passing thought into action. But if you can't, I do beg you to like it, so it does circulate more, and to share it, because, well, I want the message to get out. And yeah, you are my only hope, as was said in some film or other. Our pandemic response was world leading. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Sweden's was world leading. But we'll leave that on one side for a moment. Handing control to a secretive international body will only make things worse, says John Redwood in an article in The Telegraph. The UK is holding a long and expensive inquiry into how its various governments handled the COVID epidemic and into the response of the NHS. Look, when that epidemic started, it was entirely justified to have a lockdown for a couple of weeks just to get things started, because it was supposed to be the worst thing to hit Britain since the Black Death. After that, there shouldn't have been any more lockdowns. And Sweden has proved it. I think the number of deaths in Sweden were also quite high, but they were no higher than here. And at least the Swedish economy didn't suffer. I think that's, but you see, I'm saying this. I can't be sure, because people use different statistics. Different people use different means of measuring things. So I have no idea. And I don't think anyone does. And that's the dishonesty in itself, but I'm not going into that right now. And it was a good idea to put up the Nightingale hospitals. A Nightingale hospital is a temporary infection ward, and they can be in tents. Nightingale hospital can be in a tent or a series of tents, or in a, you know, something like a disused warehouse or whatever, just a place where large numbers of infectious people can be housed and helped if possible. So that was all perfectly reasonable. But what happened afterwards was not reasonable. That was just hysteria, and it was governments not wishing to step back from their hyper hysterical response. They didn't want to make out that they'd been wrong. And they just carried on. They allowed things to carry on their own momentum. And of course, we did have some epidemiologists who were telling the government of all sorts of horror and dread, while at the same time, in one notable case, the epidemiologist who told the government that everybody should be locked down for 6 months or something ridiculous had his girlfriend sneak across London to amuse him while he was staying home. All right, there are many questions to answer and lessons to be learnt. Oh, that lessons to be learnt again. They're always saying, oh, well, we made a mistake, but there are lessons to be learnt. If they did learn something, then that would be of use, but they don't. They don't. Look, this Britain has had a continuous government of a similar sort, even through the feudal period, a similar sort since 1066. And prior to that, it was the Saxon form of government, which was more a council type thing. But even so, pretty well governed from like the 8th century. You'd think they'd know a bit about government by now, wouldn't you? So saying there are lessons to be learnt, no, they never learn. That is probably the problem. And just as an example, since we're talking about Saxons, you might remember from your early English history that Britain was full of Romanized Celts. And then when the Roman Empire withdrew, the Saxons, or various sorts of Danes and Jutes and different sorts of Scandinavians, came to first of all, the east coast of Britain, and then just sort of took over. They came in droves, in boats, as unwelcome migrants. Does this sound familiar? And by the time they came to a halt, the original Celts were in what we now call Wales and Cornwall, and that was about it. They had been pushed out of their Romanized Celtic country by waves of illegal immigrants that they couldn't stop. And the irony of it is, it's called Wales because in whatever Scandinavian language was being spoken, the Welsh meant foreigners. So the original people who lived in this country, they were the foreigners by the time the Saxons, or whatever it was, had taken over. And then they had the goal to call those guys the foreigners. And we regard that as perfectly natural and normal now. I mean, our history has been Saxon ever since. So surely we could learn about migration simply from that. Does anyone talk about that? Is anyone talking about that now? No. So yeah, lessons to be learned. No, I learned this lesson when I was 10 years old. Apparently the people in charge of the country, though, they didn't learn that. In due course, the work of the committee will trigger more parliamentary and public debate. It should mean we enter any future health alarm better prepared and better informed. No, we'll be just as hysterical next time because we don't learn lessons. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization shaped much of the work on COVID-19. So originally, Tedros, whatever his name is, was told by the Chinese, who, obviously soothed his ego a great deal. No, it's not infectious person to person, so we're all right. And that's what he was saying until it became obvious that that was a lie. And then China had to stop sending plane loads of infected Chinese people all over the place to even out the odds. But Tedros thingy didn't care about it. Was it Tedros? Hang on a minute, I'll check his name. Oh, yes, yes. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Almost. Yeah, I'll call him Tedros. But the WHO is not holding a public inquiry into what it got right and wrong. It got everything wrong. That's why. There will be no public scrutiny and debate. There'll be whether its role in vaccines and medicines was helpful. No, it was all on the side of China for a while. It's alarming then that the WHO is now seeking to lock us into a new treaty which would empower it to set a policy on stockpiles and access to medicines, vaccines and health equipment, including obliging Britain to hand over up to 20% of pandemic-related health products. Did you know that? Look, the fact that we are even debating it means that Redwood, as do others, know that our governments are likely to hand over our powers to other organisations. They were ready to do that to the European Union, and they are equally ready to do that to the World Health Organization. And that's because people don't like being blamed for making mistakes anymore. And as long as a politician can say, well, it's not my fault. I mean, we're governed by the World Health Organization, we have to follow their rules. Oh, it doesn't matter if your granny's dying there because we had to give away 20% of our medicines to the WHO to have it wasted on huge, colossal vanity projects. No doubt. No, but that doesn't matter. I am not responsible. It's all the WHO's fault. You can blame them. Yeah. Good luck with that. OK, if this right is granted, it could prove the thin end of the wedge. It's the whole bloody pile driver. What do you mean, the thin end of the wedge? It's not hard to see how the WHO might try to take powers over a wider range of issues related to the responses to any new health problem it identifies as being in its area of influence. So you see, the trouble with these sorts of things, apart from the principle, which is wrong to start with, is that the windows keep moving. So what starts out as a pandemic policy will end up as a policy in all sorts of things. And this is not ridiculous. It can end up with them saying, all right, people can't sleep in the same beds because it means the mattresses can roll together and hurt their backs or whatever. And from then on, it's single beds only for everyone, or daft things like that, because that's what big organisations do. They have to find work for themselves. As Lionel Schreiber said when she was talking about the fact that the trans thing, well, that's another reason not to monetize this video. The trans thing started when gay marriage was allowed, more or less, generally in the West. Because then the people who were fighting for that had to fight for something else, or they'd lose their jobs. She pointed that out. Well, it's the same thing here. There's this, mission creep, that's the word, mission creep. But Redwood knows that this is a tendency of government. British governments and opposition parties should have learnt by now. Yeah, well, that's one of the lessons they haven't learnt, that our voters do not want their powers of self-government removed by signing up to international treaties. Yeah, well, you'd think they'd have learnt that, wouldn't you? The public expect their elected ministers to make the decisions that affect us all and keep us safe in an accountable parliament and with much debate and criticism to try to get it right. I don't like this affect us all and keep us safe. I hate the way we expect everything to be safe now. Well, yeah, I told you I'm a horse rider. That's just about the least safe sport anyone could take up. But I don't like this constantly running to government to be safe. And what is happening is governments are running to organisations like the European Commission on Human Rights or the World Health Organization to keep themselves safe. to deflect criticism of them. That's what the big problem is. And the fact that Redwood is even writing an article on this shows that he knows that our government, of whatever political stripe, is very tempted to do that. Somewhat slightly less the Conservatives, maybe Reform. Labour or Greens, absolutely. Absolutely. And as I say, people like Redwood, I'm standing on that hill with Redwood, looking at the other hill. That's our government there, with its foot on the accelerator. And can they even hear us if we shout? Well, if enough of you guys shout loudly enough, possibly. It's better than doing nothing at all, isn't it? Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.